Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard George. I'm presenting this on behalf of myself and John Simons. John's done the last couple of presentations, and he's got a background in surface water, and he unfortunately couldn't make it here today, so I'm going to fill in and do what I can in his absence. How many people here are actually think they're going to get through this summer, or how many people, actually the other way around, who doesn't think you're going to get through this summer with water? Is there anyone that can't? Okay, right, that's probably about a quarter. That's a pretty significant number. The trouble with surface water, obviously, and has been discussed, is it's not the dam. It's pretty hard to make it. So perhaps the next talk on groundwater and desalination will probably give you some more guidance there. So today I want to cover 4 areas. I want to talk about rainfall patterns and variability quickly. I don't need to do a lot of that. I think a lot of that is self-evident. I want to talk about some of the opportunities in surface water, and really you guys in this area have the best opportunity to increase your surface water. You think you get yourself out at Easter Lake Race at 280 millimetres, you are way better off, and there are some tactics to use for next year, not necessarily for this year. And that's about harvesting and saving water. And I'll talk a little bit about the economics of water, but I want to probably move over the top of that. So we talked about preparation, and we talked about understanding the trends in surface water and in rainfall, and everything to do with rainfall, surface water, groundwater, whatever you like. So this diagram here is from Arthur River rainfall records over 120 years, from 1900 up to 2020. And you've got all your rainfall data sitting in the records. What this graph plots is the difference between the average monthly rainfall and what you actually got. So if the line is going up, and this is a bit difficult when you go back to the start because we didn't actually know what the average was, but essentially up through here, it was essentially a wetting process. And you can see, the 50s and the 60s were wetting events, but essentially since the 70s, 75 or somewhere around there, we've been on this slide, and there's no break in that slide. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we have to plan every year after the next for less water. And I think you've got to, even if it's wrong, even if you don't believe in climate change, and even if you believe in a better future, plan for less water. You have to plan for less water. And here's a simple summary of that record that we just looked at. And we're comparing the early record from the 2010 to 75 with the record from 2000 to 2019, and everything that's brown is either 20 to 30 or above 30% reduction in the number of days that receive 10 millimetres, and I'll explain why that's important. And the next graph is the last 10 years compared to that old history, comparing the number of days rainfall since 2010 with greater than 20 millimetre events. And this is where you are, and the southwest corner in particular. A lot of this is actually just statistics because there's only 10 years of records, and we've had 2017 and a few other things that makes it a bit wetter than it actually is. So the message is pretty clear. We know we're in a reducing rainfall environment, but especially we're in a reducing runoff environment. And if you know anything about the Perth Dam and the Perth Hills, for every millimetre we lost in rainfall, we lost 3 millimetres in runoff. So it's actually exponential, or at least not the relationship isn't a straight line. And you can look this up, and I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but this is something called Climate. Any of you use Climate? It's a free website, only a couple of you. So you can put in Arthur River, you can put in Darkin, you can put in Quartering, whatever you want, and you can say how much rainfall, in this particular case, am I likely to get between the 1st of January and the 31st of December above 15 millimetres. I'm going to get 5 events is the long run average, and for that 15 millimetre event, essentially I'm going to get a 15 millimetre event every year, and I'll explain why that's important. If we bring the rainfall record up to a bit, to 1990 to present, you actually can use it to see how many years you miss out on getting that rainfall event. And obviously we're having these field days because we've missed out at least 2 years in a row. I think the other thing that you're all really aware of moving away from complete sheep to a lot more cropping is two things that have gone on. The first one is that our crops and our efficiency of putting crops in and using water has increased, and we're not getting runoff. So we've essentially got dams abandoned in catchments that no longer get surface water. And they get that lack of water for a couple of reasons. The first one is we've got really effective in getting our tillage systems right, we're getting water around the crop early, and the crop's getting away and using that water. We've also lost our 10mm events, a third of them, we've lost a third of our 25mm events. So our natural catchments are backing off in terms of effectiveness. But in particular, this district was renowned, particularly on the heavier or the duplex soils, of getting waterlogging. So this is a picture from I think I dug it out from probably about 2000 or something like that, maybe in late 1990s, where every dam, if it wasn't filled by a wet patch above the dam, was filled by a wet patch that a bank picked up halfway to the dam. So those two things are reducing over time. All right, so let's look at just the big picture on dams. So one of our guys, in fact, if you know the rights from Catchment, Nick's been with us for a few years. He's a great tech and loves looking at old problems in different ways. So he said to me, can I spend a bit of time? I want to train the computer to machine learn how to find dams. I said, right, go for it. So this is actually a heat map of the number of dams in the wheat belt. So red means very few dams, white means lots of dams, and blue means Manjimup, Franklin, where there's a high proportion of dams. Not only that, there's 200,000 dams roughly. You mapped 163, missed out 35. Don't worry about statistics, but the important thing here is 163 gigalitres of water you guys have within your farm's catchments access. And if you think about the rest of the presentations, Anthony's going to talk about the Water Corporation's pipeline network, which delivers 4 or so gigalitres north of the Great Eastern Highway and 2 or so gigalitres south of the Great Eastern Highway. The single biggest way you're going to keep water on your farm is to use your dams. That's a very big number. And if you put 1,000 kilolitres or 1 megalitre into a dam, that's what the 163 gigs is all about. That's a massive number. That's the Wellington Dam spilling over the top. I will say that the other thing that this area is particularly affected by is the amount of dams that are fresh and the amount of dams that have got groundwater. Blessing and curse. But this is a plot of the entire dams. About 30% either are in saline areas or they've got a shallow water table either in the base of them or close to in the base of them. So this is the product that Nick's put together, and this is his development of the algorithm that finds dams, and you can see them all sitting there. So what you can see here as well is there's 2 dams on banks, and maybe or maybe not those 2 dams are not generating water. I put this picture up because I searched for about half an hour last night to find a road catchment in the West Arthur Shire. I found a couple of them, but they're very few and far between. And when I said at the start, you have a great opportunity to not have empty dams, essentially that's because you've still got a lot of adoption capacity around road catchments. Not necessarily on the steep country, not necessarily on the deep gravels, but there are soils that would allow road catchments in this area. And I have to say the other thing about this is that as a Department of Agriculture, we employed something like 30 staff between the 40s through to the 90s, doing nothing but doing farm advisory services, siting dams, designing road catchments, and that is completely evaporated along with the rainfall. So the service side of that industry is an opportunity for anyone who wants to take it on. I will talk a bit about the way, and that comment there is about your dams were designed on a 1970s climate, not on a 2020 climate. I think I made that point. But I will talk in a minute about using dams in a slightly different way. And here's an example of 2 dams side by side, one on a good catchment, one sitting out in the paddock hoping that it rains. And one opportunity that you do have right this summer is to bulk up your water. So the thing that evaporates water the most is heat, and hot water evaporates the fastest, cold slower. But surface area, those two dams have, if you like, double the surface area, double the evaporation. Put all the water from that dam into that dam and you halve the surface area you've stayed. So you can play around with pumps and pipes to tactically move water into key dams. The move to big catchments and big dams has started in the eastern wheat belt, and I don't necessarily think it's for you here, but going from 5,000 cubic metres to 10,000 cubic metres is possible, but there are only so many sites that you guys have available because of rock, shallow water and salt. But it is possible to go that direction. This is an 11 hectare catchment on a 20,000 cubic metre dam because there's a feedlot. That is probably not the optimum dam size for the eastern wheat belt either, but big dams with deep storage that will cross you over 2 decile 1 rainfall events is something to start thinking about. All right. So in addition to capturing more rainfall and things like roaded catchments, there's a bit more interest now in reduced evaporation. And Anthony's got some trial work, which we won't talk about today, but there's a long literature on this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We know roughly what these cost, and there are commodities in the market around, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit later. There are covers of various sorts, and obviously we just talked a bit about roaded catchments, and I'll talk about groundwater. The other point about dams and catchments in this area, one of your limitations is, especially with heavily grazed pastures, you'll end up with a lot of organic matter in your dams, you end up with your water quality problems. So tactically for next year, putting in double dams or even just catchments in front of the dams and piping water in so that you don't get the organic loads and you get better quality components. But if you make that dam deeper, you can also use that as a storage and then move water between the two storages, and that increases the efficiency. We're getting to the point where we're getting questions about this next level of engineering around dams. This is the only one of a few that I'm aware of, and this is a guy called Hanman. He's in, I think it's the Coorong in South Australia, and they actually black plastic. I think it's 80 by 40 metres on a 2,000 cubic metre, quite a small dam, so maybe 3, if anyone corrects me. And this thing obviously will run, on a swift of rain. So, but that's $100,000. And that's with a lot of paddocks and a lot of sheep that are fed to dirt. You're talking about big tanks, and you're talking about reticulated essentially being your own water corporation to do that sort of thing. I don't think we're there yet. I think for you guys, you've got a lot of room to go with your catchments, but just note those things are out there, and I'm sure someone will want to study them sooner or later. The area where we're looking at in a medium term, we've talked a bit about plastic, is about, I said before that I used that 10 to 12 millimetre number about how many events you've lost in rainfall. And the reason we use that number is that's the typical threshold to make a roaded catchment work. The typical threshold to make a paddock work is about 25 millimetres. There's lots of numbers and variability in soil types, but just sort of stay with me. And we're not going down the bitumen pathway, and I think we've talked about plastic, but we do have the opportunity to look at sealants. And this is an experiment we did at Franklin, and it was also done at the Meriden Research Station. And the idea is to make good catchments run, instead of at 10 to 12 millimetres, to get them to run at 4 to 6 millimetres. So that increases the amount of water you capture, and it means that you are effective in any year, not just effective in wet years or average years, whatever average years. We'll also put this up here of all those legacy reports that sit on websites with WWs in front of them. This is probably the best resource that we've got on our website if you want to go down the path of looking at roaded catchments, dam sizing, and doing the planning around new dams and catchments. This is just a comment slide, and it came out of the field day at Coolin just a few weeks ago. And this is a 2020 dam catchment. Now, I would have said that that catchment was probably not very efficient. It's got a reasonably decent area of sand in the floor, but not too much. It's got sun in the other one, so this is the same dam looking back up there, but it's very long and has a road on it. And it's given 3,000 cubic metres of water this winter under this rainfall condition. So the point for you out of this slide is, yes, it's a road catchment, but this one worked because it was connected to a road. And in your case, you could connect it to laneways. You've got a lot of hard surfaces on your property. So it's not all about building road catchments, it's making good use of hard surfaces that you might already have. All right, we've talked a little bit about these things, and I'll colour over them. This is actually, Anthony, your dam at Borden?
Wellstead.
Wellstead, thanks, yep. And these are floating modular covers, floating modular, what are they called?
Hexacovers.
Hexacovers, thank you, yep. And they have the opportunity to reduce evaporation significantly, but they cost, Anthony?
Anywhere between about $30 and $45 a square metre.
Yeah. So plastic is out there, these covers are out there, but as I said, I think from your story, and even getting 20% from a windbreak, my attitude is you're up here with getting deeper dams and in the right landscape, using double or compartment or at least sill traps, adding eroded catchments, and I think you're starting to get into an effective farm system. So I'll finish off with just a case study. Now I've just mocked this up from a water balance perspective, just to show you what this is a Lake Grace dam, 10,000 cubic metre dam with a 5 hectare eroded catchment, just note that 5, with a leakage rate that's pretty typical for wet belt dams. A 2 millimetre dam is the exception in the wheat belt for leakage. White clay, most leak much more than that, so just in terms of context. 1,600 hectare unit of land on this, so it's part of a farm, with 1,120 hectares of crop, and that's 100 litres a hectare 4 times coming out of this dam in this example in terms of spray units. And it's running that many DSC, and it's got an evaporation treatment coming, and we've sealed the dam. So this is a 15-year run from 06, when just about every dam in the wheat belt filled up, through to today. What's really interesting in this is based on a farmer's dam, but it's not statistically the same story of the same dam. But this dam has failed once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in that 15 years. Failed in the sense that for most dams that we would have designed to you in the 90s, an acceptable dam would have failed 1 in 10 times. Because economically it's very hard to design a dam never to fail, because you'll end up with 30 hectares of eroded catchment or something really silly. Or you'll blow the wall out of the front of the dam when you get a wet year. So there's a trade-off. That brown line is when we just stopped the leakage. And you can see it failed once, twice, 3, didn't, 4 times. So dropping the leakage still means that dams fail. Adding on an evaporation treatment meant it only failed once just, twice just. Finally, I'm just going to, a couple of comments about water and pricing. And this is a work in progress, and what we're trying to do is to work out the relative value of water in a cropping and a grazing farm business, and work out where the simplest investment to start off with is. And I can tell you from all that's not shown and all that is shown, a good bore beats just about everything, even though there's an operating overhead to it. Eroded catchment working is the second best investment you'll make, if not the best investment you'll make. And big dams and big catchments, especially if they've got large eroded catchments, and if you're in a cropping system, is a large economic cost. In fact, what we're learning from the foregone cost of big catchments is is that they actually add a lot to the negative side of the equation. But when you don't have water, I think you probably lose 5 or 10 hectares of crop. Desalination, which Anthony's going to talk about after I talk about groundwater. The case studies that we're doing at the moment is to prove up this number of anywhere between a couple of dollars a kilolitre and $5 in north for the cost of water. And against scheme water, which is a pretty much not a cost that you have because you don't have a scheme, sitting at around $2.60. And water carting, well, I mean, water carting at the farm can be anything at that sort of number up to $13, depending whether it's next door. But if you look at the cost, and Tracy won't probably talk about the cost, she might if you ask her, but with the state paying anywhere between $30 to $50 a kilolitre to get water around to 11, 12 depleted areas this last summer, we don't want to go there. So I guess what I want to finish off with is, thanks to John for doing the talk, but to say that you've got the highest rainfall, you know, you're in the western part of the wheat belt, climate change is going to get you a lot less and slower. You've lost a lot of rainfall, you've lost a lot of runoff events, but you have the opportunity with well-sited dams, with better catchments and backup bores to not be water deficient. And I guess the trick is to work out what it is that you need, because we're starting a 4-year research project in surface water, and one of the reasons I was really keen to come along to today in the last few days is I've done the talking so far, but I'd be really keen to know where the gaps are in knowledge that you need filling if we go back down the path of doing water R&D. Thank you.